Have you ever been bitter towards someone? You ever felt like you were on the receiving end of somebody's bitterness? Oh, we've all been there. I've seen a few shake their heads, but every one of us could. Every one of us have been there. You know, there are some times that I speak on subjects that some people might say, well, I really couldn't relate to that. That's not me. I don't deal with that. But now when we start talking about bitterness, that includes every one of us. Every one of us. I don't care how good you are, how good you think you are, how good your friends or your family might be. Bitterness is a part of life because sadly enough, bitterness is a part of the flesh. And because we are a part of the flesh, we sin, we do wrong, we need the Lord's forgiveness. For the last 4 weeks, I've done a series of sermons on Jonah. All of those sermons is what we would call expository sermons, where I took it verse by verse and explained what that meant and how that related. But today, this message is more of a topical sermon. But again, it's one that we can all relate to, and that is bitterness. What prompted this message? I don't see a lot of bitterness in our church. That's not it, okay? I think we're a loving, good, God-fearing body of believers. Not perfect. Don't expect you to be perfect. Don't expect me to be, okay? But I look at all the things going on out there in the world. I see so much bitterness, so much hate, so much resentment. That's always been that way. But I think it's safe to say we've seen a whole lot more of it recently. Now, the part that bothers me most about that is all that we see out there in the media has a way of trickling down into our own lives. And if we're not careful, before you know it, we've got bitterness coming out of our own lives. Talking bitter about other people, being bitter-spirited toward others, becomes a way of life for us. Well, what does God's Word have to say about that? Okay, let's go back to 1878. Not too many of you. Coach, you might have been here in 1878. But not too many of us were. I sure wasn't, okay? For the next 12 years, there was, I would call it the granddaddy of all family feuds, started. The Hatfields and McCoys lasted for 12 years. Now, interestingly enough, my mother-in-law is a descendant of the Hatfields. Find that to be rather interesting. Explains a lot. No, just kidding. Just kidding there, okay? Edit that out, okay? But for 12 years, and there were these neighbors that were feuding, fussing, fighting. 3 Hatfields died, 7 McCoys, and 2 outsiders. 12 people died. What was it over? You have any idea what it was over? A pig, a hog. One hog divided 2 families. Cost 12 lives over 12 years. Nonsense. But it was resentment, bitterness, a wrong-spirited heart that brought it all about. Now, this subject of bitterness is one that I said we're very familiar with. It has affected every one of us. In some way, some form, some fashion, you may be nestled in it right now. Situations going on in life, at work, in the family. You certainly have been there if you've been around any length of time. And you live long enough, you'll experience some more bitterness. See, bitterness has enslaved and caught people in bondage for years. Some are bitter toward God. Maybe a tragedy happened, something that turned their world upside down. And you can understand, why some might feel that way. I don't know that I understand why they stay that way, but I can understand. They're bitter toward God. Things happen. I'm mad at you, God. I'll never forgive you. That kind of thinking. There's others that are bitter toward other people, other family members, friends, cohorts. Maybe it's a boss. Maybe it's a boss that unjustly fired you and let you go. Didn't even let you tell your side of the story. Maybe it's a spouse that left you for somebody else. And it created a lot of bitterness. Maybe it's a business partner where things just didn't go right. Could be bitterness toward parents. Could be parents bitter toward their children. Bitterness, you don't have to look very far to find it, to sense it, to see it. Many are bitter toward the church. I'm not talking about our church specifically. There may be. But I'm talking about any and all churches. My interaction with people throughout the day, every day, carry on a lot of conversations with people. Some of them are rather interesting. Some of them by the close of the day, I may jot some things down, so that's some good sermon material. I drink coffee with a bunch of people in the mornings. They were teasing me yesterday or maybe Friday. Said, you just come in here to get sermon material, don't you? I said, yeah, y'all provide me with a lot of good sermon material. But that's just part of interacting with other people. There's people bitter toward the church, the body of Christ. Maybe something happened a long time ago. I don't want anything to do with the church anymore. Something somebody said, something somebody did. It was bitterness that never was dealt with. Now, ultimately, bitterness is the result of feeling that someone has done something wrong to you. Someone has hurt you. And life just isn't going right. And all of those things can bring about resentment. I worked up a little brief definition. I didn't go to Webster's for this, okay? I don't have to go to Webster's for everything, okay? It does help me a lot of times, but some things I can come up with my own definition. With bitterness, I would call that the harbored hurt in the heart. Within the heart, you're harboring resentment, bitter feelings. Now, if allowed, it will destroy you. Destroy any of us. It'll kill us. Are we ready to have Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15 up on the screen, please? And I'll tell you, well, put 14 and 15 up there if you don't mind. We'll make reference back to these here in just a second. But let's deal with the source of the bitterness first. If you've got any kind of bitterness, let's just stop and say, okay, what is the source of my bitterness? What is the source of me feeling the way I do? See, bitterness is described as a root. Strive for peace with everyone. Now listen, that's some pretty good advice. Strive for peace with everyone and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. And then verse 15. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. Again, bitterness here is described as a root. It is something beneath the surface. Really, for all practical purposes, a root is invisible to the eye, but it is as real as the tree itself. It can stretch deep, deep into the soil. I was with a grave digger this past week at a country cemetery. And after I got there with them and was doing what I needed to do, I said, wow. Looked down at that grave and I said, y'all sure did run into a lot of root digging that. He said, yeah, and it was tough. It's tough cutting out those roots. Well, I thought about what I was going to be saying today. And I thought, the root to our bitterness is a lot like cutting the root out to an old tree that's been growing for hundreds of years. It's tough. It's a lot of hard work. But it doesn't take a lot of soil to allow that root to start. It doesn't take a lot of cultivation. It's quick to grow, but it's very difficult to remove. It's easy. It's easy to plant a seed of bitterness. But man, it is extremely difficult to cut it out, to weed it out. Now, if we are going to handle the bitterness, we've got to deal with the source. What is the source of my bitterness? Now, to do that, we have to understand why we have become bitter in the first place. See, we get bitter basically, when I think about this and search this out, we really get bitterness basically from one of three reasons. And it could be two or all three of them, but at least one. One is because of what has been done to us. Another one is what has been said about us. And then thirdly, what has been taken from us. Now it's interesting, when I mention all three of those, that is exactly what Jesus dealt with in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5:11 tells us concerning what is said about us. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my name's sake. Blessed, happy are you when people revile you and persecute you. Really? Well, I've been reviled. Feel like I've been persecuted a few times. I didn't feel like I was blessed. Now, if some of you have ever said anything derogatory, defamatory, slanderous, hateful, something not true, you had that said about you, join the club. Come on, let's get on the boat. We're all together. We're all in good company. We've all been there. But they did the exact same thing to Jesus Christ. And if they're going to do that to him, if we are his followers, then we've got to believe they're going to do the same thing to us. And then, we can also be bitter because of the wrong that has been done to us. Matthew 8:38 and 39. Let me just paraphrase that. It's not what happens to us nearly as much as it is how we respond and how we react to what happens to us that really counts for God. And then concerning that is taken from us. Also, in the Sermon on the Mount, the 5th chapter of Matthew, verses 40 and 42. Now, someone may borrow money from you. Anybody borrow money from you and not pay you back? Well, I could raise my hand several times, okay? You ever had somebody to borrow tools or some other kind of material things, and you've never seen them again? And some of those could be expensive things. But you mark it down. There will be times when you and I will be done wrong, sooner or later. Now, we have two choices. Anytime this happens, we can choose to be bitter. I hate that person. I can't stand that person. I hear that all the time. I really do. Or we can be better. Now, which one of those is easier? Which one of those is of the flesh? Well, we know. But which one would God, in God's word, teach us to be? He don't want us to be bitter. He wants us to be better. And that leads me to my second point. We have to determine the course that we're going to take. Hebrews 15:12 tells us that the root of bitterness can spring up and cause an awful lot of trouble. See, that root of bitterness, I can't think of one good thing that comes from being bitter-spirited and allowing that root of bitterness to just continue to grow in our lives. Nothing good comes out of that. Guess what? In case you don't know this, any bitter root will only produce bitter fruit. A bitter root is going to produce bitter fruit. There's a story, it's a Roman story about soldiers of Caesar. They were dissatisfied with their rations. They were dissatisfied with how they were being treated. No, they obviously couldn't complain to Caesar. But they were angry, and they took out their anger by taking arrows and shooting them up into the air as far as they could go in hopes that they might shoot one of their gods. That's a little G, by the way. All right? But they never could shoot those gods up there. Now, if an arrow goes up, what's going to happen? What goes up must come down. Now, what those soldiers didn't realize, they were shooting those arrows up, only for them to come back down. Some of them got hit by their own arrows. See, that's what bitterness does. When we dart out these attacks on others, in reality, it comes back to bite us. Again, it just doesn't work. See, I'm convinced that bitterness can mentally dominate us. As a root of bitterness grows more and more and more, it takes more soil. You think that oak tree that's been around for 200 years, that's got a root this big around, isn't taking up more soil than it did 100 years ago? So it's incorporating more things. It's bringing about more. It requires more soil. Any of you know what kudzu is? I see some of you do. All right. Kudzu is a plant that grows like wildfire. You can't get rid of it. You get rid of it, it comes right back. Well, it comes right back because there's a root somewhere that wasn't taken care of. Okay? It's a nuisance. Can't get rid of it. You know, bitterness is a lot like that. If we don't get to the root of the problem, we don't solve the problem. See, bitterness is sort of like a sponge. It's a lot like a magnet. And it draws people. And you know, if I've got a bitter spirit and you're around me very much, guess what? You're going to have a bitter spirit. And it just attracts other people. Before you know it, you got a room full of bitterness. I'm certainly not doing a lot of good anywhere. Now, the moment I start hating a person, now let me just stop right here. Most of you know that I don't use the word hate very much. I may use the word hate when we're talking about spinach, because I hate it. But I don't use the word hate when I'm talking about a person. I may hate their actions. I may hate their demeanor. I may hate what they do. But I don't hate that person. In fact, Sarah grew up in our household knowing that hate is not a word we use. There were certain other words that we didn't use. Certainly some of the obvious. But we had other demeaning words. We just don't use that. She grew up knowing that we don't hate anybody But just suppose, for the sake of this illustration here, that the moment I start hating a person, I become that person's slave. I become bondage to that person. And what happens is that resentment that I'm harboring in my own heart produces a lot of stress hormones. And those stress hormones doesn't do us a whole lot of good. It affects the body. We become so fatigued, so lifeless, so worthless. John Wesley said, "He who has 1,000 friends has not a friend to spare. But he who has one enemy shall meet him everywhere." Think about that. You can have 1,000 enemies, 1,000 friends out there, and you can't have enough. I mean, you can't spare them. But you've got one enemy, he's everywhere. How many times have you tried to run from somebody only to run into them 15, 20 minutes later? And I've known people that have been in a grocery store. Oh, there's so-and-so. And they turn to avoid that person, get down another aisle, there they are, right there. All that starts because of bitterness. Somehow, some way. Bitterness is also a depressant. It causes you to be very depressed. Now, if you look very closely, I challenge you to do this. You will find, I certainly have, I haven't found anyone. I haven't found anybody that's really happy if they're bitter. Well, if they're bitter, they complain about everything. They're very critical. They're very cynical. They're negative. They're pessimistic. I don't want to be around them. But you just don't find bitter people that's just really happy. I just love life. I love people. If they're bitter, they don't go around saying that. Bitterness will depress you. It will sadden you. It will even get you to the point where you can't even focus and function the way you're supposed to. I'm reminded of a particular situation. I shared this at the 9 o'clock service. Someone that I knew for a long time, but I knew something wasn't right. I don't know what I've done, but obviously something wasn't. I was at the funeral home. I guess I was working there then. I was at least at the funeral home. And this guy goes out and just ignores me. I don't know, it just hit me the wrong way. I says, I'm going to deal with this right now. I followed him right out to his car. And I says, now listen, I don't know what the problem is. Let's get to the bottom of this. If I have offended you in any way, please accept my apologies. Well, he was a little rough and gruff there at the beginning. But then I said, listen, I know you to be a Christian, and I am too. Can't we work through our differences? And by the time we got it all resolved, it was over a misunderstanding. Didn't amount to a hill of beans. But here he was, bitter. And I think about a lot of situations where people are in the midst of bitterness, and it all started over next to nothing. Bitterness causes you to do a lot of things you regret. You can burn your house down just to get rid of a rat. That's not the answer, is it? The way we try to resort to resolving bitterness is not always the answer. But see, I've also seen where bitterness is also physically debilitating. Now listen, the human body was not created to nurse bitterness. God did not create the human body to nurse bitterness. God didn't create the human body to carry those grudges and those resentments. Medical experts, and I've got enough of medical journals that I've kept over the years. Medical experts tell us that there are over 50 diseases, starting out with ulcers and high blood pressure, ranging into major heart attacks that can be caused by this one emotion, bitterness. Started out, but it just built up, got bigger and bigger and bigger. Now let's go to the third one. We've got to defeat that force that brings about that bitterness. Now remember, we're already told in Scripture here that bitterness is a root. It is a root that is under the ground. Now, if you want to get rid of it, you got to find it. If you want to get rid of it, you got to dig it up. Every day our bodies cleanses themselves of harmful toxins. Well, let's just be honest, okay? Through the process of waste elimination. That's part of the human process, the human body. But if those toxins are allowed to stay in there, and if those toxins accumulate, what happens? Sickness, sepsis, death, nothing good. Now, if we want to remain mentally healthy, we've got to get rid of those toxins in our body because it affects our minds, it affects our soul, it affects our heart. It affects every fiber of our being. Acts 8:23 speaks of the poison of bitterness. Someone said, bitterness is like drinking poison and waiting for the person to die. So, how do we uproot? How do we pull out those roots of bitterness that we may have inside? Well, there's 3 easy words that I want to give you. Just because they're easy words doesn't mean it's easy to do. But it's easy for you to remember what we need to do. First of all, forget it. That's easy for me to tell you. But there's been some of you that have told me, forget it, milkweed, forget that. Put it down by the wayside, let it go. Whatever caused that problem, that brought about that resentment, put it beside you. Let it go. Ephesians 4:11. Let your bitterness, your wrath, anger, clamor, and evil speaking be put away from you. Interestingly enough, the word put away means to dispose of, to discard, to get rid of it. Now, we know what Scripture tells us. But that's not what we're doing. We're not discarding that. We're not disposing of it. We're not getting rid of it. We're not forgetting it. We keep remembering it. See, we've got to get rid of this get even mentality. That's where we are. Get even mentality. And I've seen it for years. I'm not just talking about things that just surfaced lately. There's been that going on for years. Even as a grade schooler. You hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. I'll get even with you, buddy. And we may not say that, but we act it out. You know, no one in the Bible outside of Jesus Christ himself was more mistreated, and no one had any better reason to be bitter than Joseph in the Old Testament. You know, after he rose to power, and remember his brother sold him into slavery and he was mistreated and all, you know that story, you should know that story. We did a series of sermons on Joseph several years ago. But after Joseph rose to power, he married an Egyptian woman. And that woman bore him 2 sons. The first one was Manasseh. And Manasseh literally means remembering no more. Remembering no more. And then the second child, second son, was Ephraim, which means success. Now these two sons, through these two sons, Joseph commemorated the fact that God had taken all of those things that had brought about bitterness in his life and to work through those. And here he was in high position. And he was there in a land where he was a slave and a prisoner. I don't know that Joseph really ever forgot that. The human mind just doesn't forget some things. But it doesn't mean that we bring it back into remembrance. Talk about it and bring it back up and point the finger at that situation or that person. Then the second key that we have here is to forgive it. Going back to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15 that we read earlier, tells us that if we're not willing to let go, if we're not willing to let go of that bitterness, then we will fall short of the grace of God. And I don't believe that means we're going to lose our salvation, okay? That's not what that's talking about there. But it does mean that we will not be living our lives in an abundance and according to the grace that God has and wants for every one of us. You see, grace is not just something that God gives to us to forgive us, but grace is also something that we use when we forgive others. If we cannot forget and forgive others that have wronged us, if you find that hard right now, I got a suggestion for you. I think you need to go out there to the back behind the church over there by the cemetery. You can do that in the middle of the day. You can do it at midnight. I don't care. Spend a little bit of time there at the foot of the cross. Just think about that cross. Think about our sins. Think about our wrongs to others. Think about how others have wronged us. Spend a little time there. It'll get our frame of thinking in line. And then let me close out with this story. A traveler was making his way with a guide through the jungles of Burma. Now, I didn't get a chance to ask you about this. I don't think Burma is called Burma now. It's been renamed, I believe. But it's in the southeastern part of Asia. And here they are. They're getting ready to cross a shallow but wide river. So here is this traveler along with the guide, and they're walking through this river. Probably not much more than waist high. But then when he gets all the way to the other side, he looks down and there's leeches that have attached themselves to him. Well, his first instinct is to take that leech and grab it and pull it off. Take this and pull it off. The guy said, no, don't do that. See, if you do that, you'll leave a part of that leech in you. And that will create an infection. But what do I do? He said, you need to go and take a warm, balsam bath. And you let those leeches soak in that warm water, and they will release themselves naturally. Boy, wouldn't that just be good? If we could have that bitterness that enthrones us, that engulfs us, to just release themselves. Because what happens is we want to pull it out. There's a part of it there. And all it does is create infection. So I ask you, at the beginning, you ever had any bitterness? You may be here today and say, I've never been bitter toward anybody in my life. But I have a tough time believing it. We have to deal with this. What is the godly way of looking at bitterness? The bitterness that we may give to others, we may be on the receiving end. God's word addresses it more than we realize. Let's pray.